Bir sonraki konuğumuz RBC Blueberry Kıdemli Stratejisi ve Chatham House Rusya ve Avrasya Programı üyesi Sayın Timothy Eş'i alkışlarla sahneye davet ediyorum. Hello, Timothy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here in Turkey, in Istanbul. Love the city.
Our pleasure. Let's start, of course, first of all, I want to ask you the latest geopolitical risks. And the main topic, the main question, I'm wondering that, which countries or regions do you think are likely to emerge, like powerful, this evolving global order?
Yeah, sure. Look, it pains me in my life that every morning I wake up and I open my X on my Twitter. I worry about what Donald Trump has said next, right? I mean, literally every day. And, you know, we can talk about lots of different things, but the key player globally is Donald Trump, right? And the key driver of geopolitical risk, right? And, you know, when I think of the world, you know, and obviously I'm British, I'm European-focused, and I include Turkey in that, right? I mean, it's extraordinary, really. I mean, you know, we had the first Trump term where there was adults in the room with guardrails, and I don't think we would ever imagine the second Trump term that's proven to be the case, right? I mean, just imagine the very future of NATO is in doubt, right? I mean, personally, I think NATO is dead. I know there's an Ankara summit coming up in Turkey, and I think Turkey will do a remarkable job. And I think if anyone perhaps can save the future of NATO, it's the Erdogan-Trump relationship, right? I mean, they have some kind of special chemistry going on. But the reality is the reality, right? I mean, you know, I'm probably known as a Turkey fanatic. You know, I've covered it 20-odd years, 26 years, and I'm also a Ukraine. I mean, people know me as a kind of Ukraine-Russia guy. And look, the way I view Europe now is this, that Europe faces this existential threat from Russia, right? Russia is a bad actor, obviously invaded Ukraine. Putin has this obsession with Ukraine. He will not stop until he gets Ukraine. And then he's attacking Europe from an asymmetric perspective, right? Imagine Russia has tried to kill the CEO of the biggest German arms company, Rheinmetall. That's an extraordinary thing, right? But Russia is acting cyber, you know, backing far-right, far-left political movements. Putin has a problem with Europe. That's clear. So there is this existential threat from Russia to Europe, right? In my mind, that is a fact, right? And Europe relied on the US backstop for the last, you know, 70 years, but particularly in the last 4 years after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, right? It assumed the Americans were going to be there. They had the same interests and the same values as Europe. I think what's clear to me, you know, J.D. Vance appeared at the Munich Security Conference last year, and he kind of read the riot act to Europe. But actually what was key, and he complained about, you know, Europe not spending on its defense and not burden sharing. But the core of the issue, I think, is it's about interests no longer align, right? Now, you know, you would say, well, why interests no longer align? Well, look, you know, when a NATO ally demands territory from another NATO ally, Greenland, that's extraordinary, right? When the US attacks Iran with Israel, you know, without consulting NATO allies, not consulting Turkey or the UK, but that action has massively negative, detrimental impacts on allies, right? I mean, the Americans are kind of saying, well, it's great, oil prices are higher, we're energy self-sufficient, we export energy, whatever. We don't, right? I mean, Turkey or Europe, we import energy. This is hugely damaging to Europe. I mean, at the same time, you know, scarce air defense missiles and defense missiles are being wasted in the Gulf when, you know, we need them to defend Ukraine in Europe, right? So this is the story, right? So, you know, the whole basis of European security over the last 70-odd years has been NATO. The Americans can no longer be relied on. They have their own interests. Their own interests are China, Iran, right? I mean, that's top of the pile. You know, from a British perspective, again, apologies, maybe not necessarily Turkey perspective, but I think actually true as well. I mean, from a UK perspective, Russia is the number one threat. And I think for Turkey itself, Turkey has no interest in Russia succeeding in winning in Ukraine. That would mean Russian domination of the Black Sea. So I think Turkey is kind of in the camp on this as well, right? So, that's an extraordinary situation, right? So, and clearly, what's clear, because of underinvestment on defense for the last, 30 years, Europe is really not able to defend itself, right? So Russia's the threat. We relied on the Americans. They're not there. They're doing their own thing. Donald Trump has this whatever agenda it is. We need to step up, right? We need to invest in our own security, reorganize our own security, whatever it is, and look for new allies and new relationships, right? Now, that creates some opportunities, right? There's a lot of talk about the middle corridor, right? I've argued, well, my kind of storyline is Europe absolutely has the resources to stop Russia. If you think European economy is $35 trillion, right? Russia is $2.5 trillion, right? I mean, even 2% of GDP spend by Europe on its defense, if it's effective, rational, and well-targeted, well-focused, can stop the Russians, right? But we have this gap, right? I mean, we've underinvested in our military-industrial complex. We lack the capacity. We lack the troops. We lack the kit. So it will take us 5 to 10 years to get to a position where we're autonomous from the Americans. And we have to be autonomous. We cannot rely on the Americans. We need an autonomous defense capability to be able to defend ourselves, right? It will take 5 to 10 years. How do we get there? How do we survive in that period when you have bad actors like Russia, playing dirty games and the Americans are not? Well, it depends on a few things. Firstly, it depends on the Ukrainians lasting as long as they can, and they've done us a great service for the last 4 years in holding back the Russians. We've been stupid. We're idiots in Europe that we wasted the first 3 years of the war in Ukraine by not really doing very much, right? And then J.D. Vance turned up at Munich and said, you guys need to wake up, and we did. So the last year, you've seen a game-changing change in view. Suddenly the Europeans are they know what the threat is. The Germans, Chancellor Merz has, massive increase in German defense spending, right? So, there has been a change in, understanding of the risks. There is the willingness to spend money to get to this position where, we have to continue to support the Ukrainians, and I think that's been the game changer in the last year and a half. The $90 billion euros of support for Ukraine, all European countries, I mean, barring a couple, maybe the Slovaks and the Czechs, whatever, but the Danes, the Germans, the French, they all understand that the Ukrainians need to survive as long as possible. And actually, the whole NATO enlargement stuff, Ukraine doesn't need NATO membership anymore. Europe needs Ukraine to hold the line. So that's the first story. The second story is, and I've been my love for Turkey and Ukraine, all these kind of things, is, the country that actually can help moonshot European defense is Turkey in a way, right? I mean, Europe lacks the manufacturing base to scale drones, for example. The Ukrainians are making, great strides in terms of innovation in drone technology. To beat the Russians, you need the innovation. You need to win the war of iteration in technology space. But then you need to get to scale. Turkey can provide that, right? If we're talking about coalition of the willing and policing a peace process in Ukraine, you'll need tens of thousands of troops. UK can provide 1,000. We can't do it. The only country in Europe that has that military capability at the moment is Turkey, right? 400,000 regular troops, 300,000 reserves, tanks, kit, all that kind of thing. But you have a really innovative defense tech sector, right? I mean, it was interesting listening to this whole conference is incredible, this idea of entrepreneurs and innovation. I was at Saha for the last sort of couple of days, right? I mean, this is extraordinary, right? And it's interesting, the title, Lead the Region, right? Actually, it's leading Europe, right? I mean, you guys, what you're doing in defense tech, I mean, the drone story in Turkey is utterly remarkable, right? So, Turkey can help Europe get to a position where it's able to defend itself without the Europeans. We just need the Europeans to get the story, right? I mean, the bigotry, Islamophobia, Turkey-phobia in Europe is pretty extraordinary. And, the comments from van der Leyen, I don't know earlier, I mean, these were extraordinary, right? So I'd say there's an opportunity for Turkey there to deepen defense tech, general cooperation. Turkey can bring lots to the table. It needs something exchange, and, European attitudes need to change. and a new customs arrangement. I mean, the EU accession story is something kind of different, but on an individual country basis, we are kind of seeing it. There's a great Turkey-UK relationship at the moment, the Italian-Turkey relationship, Leonardo, Baykar, the Spanish are talking to something like that. So look, there's an opportunity there. And just finally, in terms of the whole defense stuff and for Europe, and it's about understanding the threat and being, targeting and cutting our cloth. Our number one threat, we have to defend Europe. That's the story. We shouldn't be thinking about sending ships to the Gulf. That's the Americans and other people's problem. So look, I mean, spoke for a long time. Europe, and actually the other angle, I guess the Iran war story also showed another opportunity, not just in terms of defense of Europe, but also Turkey's role in helping the Gulf states defend against the risks they face. And we have this new Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan defense relationship that again provides opportunities.
Tim, I understand what you are talking, but I think we don't prefer always talking the defense sector in Turkey because we have a lot of powerful sectors, automotive, textile, a lot of fintechs. So let's talk about the other sectors for Turkey. We need FDI right now. So what should be our main motivation for Turkey? The real rates, democracy, what do you think for the FDI, real FDI?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a foreign institutional investor. I'm not a foreign direct investor.
Except defense sector.
Sure, but look, I mean, if you go back to the peak FDI inflows into Turkey, right? Peak privatization, I think it was 07. I think it was like 27 billion of FDI, net FDI into the country. And that was the first decade of AK party rule, right? And you had the IMF anchor, you had the EU accession anchor driving, privatization was driving forward, you got investment grade, I think 2011-13. The central bank met its inflation target in the only year, which I think was 2011 under the best central bank governor Turkey's had, which I think was Durmuş Yılmaz in my mind, right? So things were going well in that period. Then you had the second decade, probably over-concentration of power, lack of checks and balances. You had bad macro policy. There's no other way to describe it, right? The unorthodox policy response, clear mistakes were made. You ended up with this inflation devaluation spiral, and then basically you've had a reset from 2023 in the country, right? And I know, look, there's a huge debate about Mehmet Şimşek and his program, and what I would say on that is, look, in terms of foreign direct, you need macro stability, right? You need rule of law, clearly for foreign direct investors. You need checks and balances to deliver good policy. I think you kind of have more of that now. Macro stability, I mean, Şimşek has achieved an awful lot, right? I was worried about systemic crisis in 2023. I really thought you're going to see a devaluation, banking collapse, probably a sovereign debt crisis in Turkey, and they've kind of stabilized and turned it around. I obviously have been quite vocal. I mean, I think mistakes were made. Policy should have been tighter earlier. I know it's easy for me to say I'm out of the country. And now we have this sticky inflation story. I mean, some people are arguing, let's change Şimşek, let's devalue the currency. And I know from a competitive point of view, the real appreciation has been a real problem. But I think a devaluation now is not the solution, frankly, right? I mean, that's just going to cause more inflation. It will set you back. I mean, you need good policy. You still need tight. Unfortunately, there's a growth inflation trade-off. That's the unfortunate thing. I don't see any other way you can address the inflation problem without a growth sacrifice, which means tighter policy for longer, right? But it also means all the other things which foreign direct investors want, right? Rule of law, courts working, level playing field. I would hope, just maybe being a bit more positive, I would hope a re-engagement with Europe, right? Because of that Turkey brings so much to the table, I would hope it also helps push the reform process forward again in Turkey, a new drive of reform in terms of like new customs union, right? I mean, that's the hope. I mean, look, I still think Turkey's natural place is still with Europe, right? 2/3 of investment, financing, and trade is still with Europe, whatever.
We are struggling to right now Made in Europe projects. We are trying to enter the Made in Europe.
Yeah. Look, again, I go back to this, again, I'm British, so I have a very favorable view of Turkey. And, post-Brexit, we see Turkey as partners in terms of we face the same constraints in terms of our relationship with Europe. And I think Turkey also thinks whatever the relationship the UK gets post-Brexit, Turkey should have. Maybe EU accession is too ambitious, and I would hope for that. But I think it needs a change of, a fundamental change in perspective by Europe itself. And, if you do face these massive challenges and threats, you need to look to some of the easy solutions. And I would still argue that Turkey is a natural partner. It provides natural solutions. I mean, look, so many Western European companies already do lots of business. They have foreign direct investment relationships. They have great, experiences in Turkey. I mean, just an example. I remember coming a year ago or so, and I spoke to some of the big auto guys, and they were complaining about the strong lira, which is true, and competitiveness problems and wage price pressures and all that kind of stuff. And they were arguing, well, we're really worried that the big car majors will make a decision to go somewhere else to Egypt, right? I mean, what's interesting is one of those car majors recently recommitted to Turkey, which was quite extraordinary in my mind. That and I guess the conclusion was that despite all the problems in Turkey, it's still a better place to do business than actually in Europe, right? And if you want to export to the European market, Turkey is still one of the best places. There's a general growth competitiveness problem across Europe, not just in Turkey, right? I mean, the Draghi model, over-regulation, all that kind of stuff. But I guess what makes me positive still about Turkey is this entrepreneurial. I mean, lots of people say to me, investors ask me about Turkey and the story, and its durability. And it's like, you guys are in a difficult neighborhood. You've always been a difficult neighborhood. That's your advantage, right? You live here, you work here, you're used to crises, and you tend to, if I wanted a partner as a regional to invest across the region, I'd rather have a Turk to invest in the Gulf states or Syria or Iraq or Iran or wherever it is than like a West European, I guess, because you know the neighborhood.
And Tim, let's talk about the latest macroeconomic data for Turkey. What is your expectation for this year and also next year? Do you believe that our inflation will come below 25%?
Well, I mean, obviously a lot depends on. The Şimşek story was that there's some favorable base effects, from food prices, from utilities services, and we may be positively surprised. But then obviously the Gulf War hit, oil prices higher. We saw that in the inflation number just recently. I mean, it's going to be very, very hard, right? And the other problem is the stickiness of inflation, opportunities missed. I think the central bank should have had a higher for longer policy. I've been criticized for that. Other people have argued something the same. I don't see a solution to the inflation problem unless there's some growth sacrifice. And it was easier early in the term of this administration, way back in 2023, 24. Clearly, you're towards the end of an electoral cycle. I would imagine there will be early elections in late 27, 28, right? And it makes it more difficult. So I guess my concern possibly was that the central bank maybe have just accepted where they are, right? What they've achieved is they avoided a systemic crisis in 23. They exited the KKM.
Yes, of course, it's a success story.
But that is a real success, right? Fiscal, without the Iran war thing, the fiscal deficit probably was like 2.5% of GDP this year. I mean, that's amazing. But on the inflation front, it's definitely been disappointing. In the end, I guess Turkish manufacturing is suffering now because you're still left in this FX regime with relatively high inflation and, the anchor of real appreciation being the only anchor in a way. If you're not willing to hold rates high, real appreciation is the only kind of angle left, right? So I worry in that we're kind of going to be stuck in this sort of 20-odd, probably high 20s inflation. Growth's kind of okay. If you go into election, the fiscal you'll see some loosening of fiscal, I guess, give you growth. I mean, I guess that's the kind of story, and I guess the official view is that, you know, basically everyone needs to be more competitive and work harder and, invest more and be more productive. And in the end, a devaluation is not really going to help you. And I'd agree with that. I mean, a devaluation doesn't really help anyone, right? You will pay for it with high inflation further down the line.
So my last question, what is the most likely exit path from the current program? You explained a bit, but maybe I add one more thing. Before the general election, the market has some concerns about the fiscal policy, easing fiscal policy cycle. So how will we manage?
Well, that's the easy one is that one, right? I mean, Mehmet Şimşek has done a remarkable job on fiscal, right? I mean, you know, his use of technology, I mean, the tax collection story has been incredible. I know everyone hates him because he's collecting taxes, but, you know, he has delivered that part of it. He has fiscal space to loosen fiscal in the run-up to elections, right? He will. All governments do that. I'd probably expect that. I mean, but that means that monetary policy should stay tight, right? But I don't see a solution in terms of a currency adjustment. And, you know, I think the next stage of the program probably will have to await the next election, because there will need to be some pain to deliver on to take inflation, you know, more significantly towards target.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's wonderful for this chat. Thank you very much for joining us again.